What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another mini reaction episode covering all things New York Mets and Bo Bichette. You guys missed the news thus far. The New York Mets have agreed to terms with Bo Bichette on a 3-year, $126 million contract, which finalized one of the more aggressive short-term free agent deals in modern MLB history on the back of what we saw last night with Kyle Tucker and the LA Dodgers. For Bo Bichette, this agreement carries a $42 million AAV, opt-outs after each of the first 2 seasons, $5 million bonuses tied to those opt-outs, a full no trade protection, and no deferred money. And again, how could you not talk about the reaction to last night? This signing comes less than 12 hours after the Mets lost out on Kyle Tucker, who finalized that deal we just mentioned, 4 years, $240 million, 60 AAV with the LA Dodgers. And the Mets, we talked about their offer. And there's been all the reports, whether it be Steve Cohen's smoke and Pope reference on Twitter. They reportedly offered Tucker 4 years, $220 million, and they could have licked their wounds, retreated, and just kind of stayed pat for the rest of this offseason and went into the season with what they had. But the Mets immediately redirected their resources towards, let's be honest, the most impactful bat left on the market, and that's Bo Bichette. And this reveals in a way that far more about the roster philosophy than a simple headline that this move gets, because it shows David Stearns was willing to spend when it makes sense. And I would say for a lot of Met fans, this is not a consolation prize or a panic response. This is a continuation of a guy with a plan. And yes, there's been a lot of grief for that plan for David Stearns, but the structure of this Bo Bichette contract really mirrors what the Mets has approached throughout the offseason. And they are trying to concentrate value at the top of the deal, preserving long-term flexibility, and let's be honest, minimizing exposure to decline years. That's exactly what we had the conversation about with Tucker and the Dodgers last night. Just because the name changed from Tucker to Bichette, the logic did not. The Mets are signaling that it prefers to overpay on an annual basis rather than absorb that multi-year risk on the back end we've seen historically with these long-term deals that it would take to secure some of these guys superstar-wise in the past, whether it be Albert Pujols or Miguel Cabrera or down the line you go. Inflation aside, you're always taking on these superstar contracts knowing that the last 3 or 4 years, it will not work out for you. Well, things have changed a little bit here. In the short term with Tucker and Bichette, this kind of mirrors a new strategy. This is a pivot to a different direction of where the offseason could take us in future years. And this is all considering 2027 and the new CBA and potentially a lockout and the black cloud looming over baseball, as social media wants to leave you out there thinking. But the willingness to absorb tax pain is kind of essential to understanding not only this move, but the Tucker move as well. Looking at Bichette's $42 million AAV, this ties Zach Wheeler for the 6th largest annual value in Major League Baseball history. But from a payroll perspective, the Mets were already approaching the highest competitive balance tax tier. We know they're not shy about getting to that level. It just has to make sense in their image of what they want this team to look like, because Bichette pushes them roughly $33 million beyond that final threshold, which means portions of his salary would be taxed at 95% and also 110%. So assuming there's an even salary distribution, the Mets will pay more than $86 million in total costs for Bo in 2026 alone, with that number approaching $97 million if he triggers his $5 million opt-out bonus, which will take place next winter. And yet, Steve Cohen, David Stearns, and the Mets, they proceeded without hesitation here. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about, who the Mets got and how this is going to help them in the immediate, lost in all this, and maybe more notable, or just as notable as the contract itself, is who the Mets prevented from making it. Bo Bichette had met with the Phillies on Monday. Devin and I discussed it a few episodes ago, talking about their meeting on Zoom. And I predicted last night on last night's reaction episode that the Bo Bichette would be a Philadelphia Philly. And I think the Phillies believed that late last night, because subsequent reporting suggested that Philly believed it was closing in on that long-term deal, potentially in the range of 7 years, $200 million. And the Mets, they looked at this and they weren't trying to outlength the Phillies. We talked about the Dodgers out-chessing the Mets last night of doing something. And the Mets, they out-leveraged the Phillies. They offered the AAV that couldn't be competed with. This was an elite level of money that he was getting. And for the Mets, they're getting optionality rather than the years uncertainty. And Bo Bichette also has the optionality as well. So we look at the way the Mets swooped in and did this. You can't discount that. This is a division rival who you're competing with on a yearly basis to get better. And the fact that the Phillies don't have Bichette and you do, that's a double whammy. And we look at Bichette's recent performance supporting that bet that the Mets are making on who he is. You look at the 2024 injury-shortened disaster of a season, the calf injuries, the broken finger. He was limited to 80 games, batting 225. The slash line was 225, 277, 322 in full. He rebounded in 2025, became that superstar player we all know he could be. Across 628 plate appearances, Bo hit 311, 357, 483 with 134 WRC plus, which by far is the strongest rate production of his career since his 2019 debut. And you look at the way that season and the trajectory took off from there. Through the first week of May, Bichette was hitting 275, 316, 363, despite the underlying batted ball data suggesting that better days were ahead of for this player. And that's why these things are important, to stay with the process and understanding this player is just falling into some bad luck. And from that point forward, those results caught up with the process, because over the next 457 plate appearances, he wanted to post a 325, 372, 528 slash line. And over his final 238 plate appearances, he took it to the next level. He produced a 381, 437, 591 line with 187 WRC plus. So Bo Bichette showed this wasn't just a hot streak. This was sustained when he was able to be healthy and right on the field and have lineup around him that is reinforcing what he can do. It really reshaped his market value of who this will be and who will be in on Bo Bichette going forward. And a lot of the underlying indicators for Bo Bichette as a player really reinforced the sustainability of the output that we saw, because for Bichette, we saw a 14.5% strikeout rate in 2025. That was the lowest of his career. He was averaging 91 miles per hour in exit velocity, produced a 48.8% hard hit rate, which both were comfortably above league average. So if you look at the full scope of his career, he carries a 294, 337, 469 batting line. He has been between 20 and 35% better than league average as a hitter in every season except the one I mentioned before in 2024, where that was marred by injuries. So Bo Bichette is the player that you're looking for. And is Kyle Tucker worth $60 million AAV? You can have the discussion. No. Is Bo Bichette worth $42 million in the immediate? You can make the discussion. No. But this is what the market is dictating. And then there was this quote from Andrew Friedman that was going around for a while saying, if you're going to be very hesitant on offering a deal to a free agent, you're going to finish third on every single one of them. So I'm butchering what the exact quote was, but the sentiment of it is real, that sometimes you have to go out on a limb and do something that makes you feel uncomfortable. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the Mets front office that if they didn't have to pay Bo $42 million annually, they wouldn't want to, but that's where the market is at this point. And you got to give them credit for wanting to win in the immediate. And for David Stearns, I'm sure, for him, it's more about the flexibility down the line, about being able to retain all the versatility that he wants to have with this roster by not log jamming it in two different directions. So looking at the legitimate defensive questions in our group chat for our fantasy baseball for the fame, a lot of New York Mets fans in that chat. And I think a lot of the conversation is questioning about the expected move to third for Bichette, because we've had a lot of time to watch Bo Bichette in the field where the range limitations at shortstop have been well documented. You look at the Blue Jays during Bo's absence in the late season, they shifted to Andres Jimenez to shortstop. And, I think a lot of conversation about third base, the defensive demands do change here. Bo's arm strength is not a plus tool, but comparatively, he was averaging 82.3 miles per hour across the diamond in 2025, which is slightly stronger than Brett Beatty, who he's effectively replacing. So the Mets, they're being honest with themselves. They're not projecting a defensive excellence from this player. They're projecting adequacy. And I think that they're quite comfortable making that trade if we're seeing the player that he was last year and the offensive output does hold. And a lot of that comfort is rooted in context, because if you look at Francisco Lindor and Marcus Semien anchor in the middle infield, the Mets can probably absorb less than ideal corner defense if it increases lineup pressure. Bo's arrival also converts some of that infield depth into some leverage on the trade market, because I mentioned Brett Beatty that he's replacing, but Mark Vientos, we got Acuna, Ronnie Mauricio, they've all been involved in circulating and trade discussions throughout the offseason, and several of them are out of minor league options. So this signing, to me, makes a secondary move not only more likely, but probably intentional from David Stearns, that we're going to see one of these names move in the future to have some more flexibility and free up some roster space. And for Bo Bichette, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the postseason context talking about the Mets evaluation, a lot of evaluation from a lot of front offices. The Phillies clearly saw this as well, where you look at Bo Bichette as the player. September, he had the knee injury that ended his regular season. It limited him early in October, but you watch them get on the field and the bat remained intact. And let's not discount that fact, because in the World Series, he comes back on one leg. He went 8 for 23, hit a 442-foot home run off of Shohei Ohtani in Game 7. Potentially could have been the game-winning hit. And you look, obviously, they're not looking at that single swing, but looking at some evidence of this player where offensively, the skill set can translate even when physical limitations are present. And maybe advanced statistics don't give you that information, but there's something like the gut test or the eye test when you see someone like Bo Bichette, who is a grinder. This guy wants to win, going out there on one leg and battling and being effective with a severe knee injury shows you the type of player he is. And I think that does come into play when you're thinking of paying a guy that much money. And you can't help but compare it to the Kyle Tucker conversation that was going around, where a lot of teams were skeptical of how much Kyle Tucker loved the game of baseball. Devin mentioned it multiple times here on our show about the skepticism of, and it's hard for us to say, but those are reports out there where maybe people are a little more sensitive to it right now with Anthony Rendon and everything that came out with him, that you want to make sure when you're giving a guy that much money that he loves baseball. And maybe the Dodgers don't care about it. Maybe they assessed the player and said, we think he's a good fit for us in the immediate. We don't care about the long-term aging of it. And it is what it is. But for Bo Bichette, for me, the eye test tells me this dude loves baseball. He loves being out there with the guys, being out there winning, and doesn't matter if he's on one leg. He's going to go out there and give it his best. And I think that does go a long way. But if you look at this together, it's hard not to put missing out on Tucker and getting Bo Bichette. They're not separate stories for the New York Mets. This is one continuous sequence, because this Mets front office, they've been taking their slings and arrows. Devin and I have certainly been doing it on here, where you watch this offseason that has not gone the way that a lot of fans wanted it to. Losing Edwin Diaz in free agency, going to the Dodgers. P. Alonso goes to the Orioles. You trade Brennan Nimmo. A lot of your favorites are gone. Jeff McNeil's gone as well. This team looks a lot different than it was. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe you want to reshape what this franchise looks like. Maybe there was something that was insidious that was happening in the chemistry of this team, and you're trying to rewrite what this team will be in its DNA. It doesn't get any better than Bo Bichette. This guy's a grinder. This is a guy who wants to win. And Bo Bichette certainly fits the mold of a guy that you can build around. And it is a short-term deal. He has the option to opt out, but in the immediate, it helps you in 2026. And that's what Met fans were looking for. They wanted a bat to be excited about. They wanted someone else to surround around Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. When you have a deal like you have last offseason with Juan Soto, again, the record historic deal, there is an urgency to win, to capitalize on the window while you have these players. And Bo Bichette does reinforce that, but also keeping the flexibility. And they're not losing leverage when Tucker chose LA. They maintained it by immediately reallocating resources. They prevented the Phillies from locking in the player they wanted. And you can't discount that, as I mentioned before. And this move, to me, again, it is very telling to me the way the market is going, with the way the Tucker deal went down, the way this went down, where we have players looking to secure the high AV rather than the years. And it is a complete difference in mindset for these free agents. And like I said before, and I said it last night, would Juan Soto have considered something different if he knew this was possible? Would he have rather gotten paid $70 million AAV on a shorter term deal on a prove it? And again, this is fantasy money for us. Like, for us, we can't even conceptualize the amount of money, but this changes the discussion about how these players are going to be compensating. And let's be honest, the 2027 black cloud of a lockout potentially out there looming does play a part here, where you're going to get your money and you're going to be able to figure it out in the moment, spending money before anything changes. Devin was mentioning maybe the Dodgers are getting one last bite of the apple before the CBA is agreed on, where we may get a lockout, or there may be a stance that there's an agreement with a salary floor and a salary cap. I don't know. But at this point, you're having this ridiculous margin of, we have these owners willing to spend and to win. And the Mets did that on this day. But they also stayed flexible. They were aggressive, of course, but they stayed flexible and they stay aligned with David Stern's broader philosophy. And you got to give them credit. They were threading the needle on that. David Stearns did not relent and say, we're not giving the amount of years. We'll give you the money. We don't want to give you the years. And let's be honest, this pivot's not complete. The Mets are still seeking help in the rotation. They want some help in the outfield. So the additional trades are likely. I mentioned the names that were out there: Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, Acuna, Ronnie Mauricio. It would not shock me to see another trade go down. And the best part about all of this, in a matter of hours, the Mets turned what was a headline loss and a disaster of an offseason compounding on itself into a defining response that I think a lot of Met fans are pounding their chest, wearing their cap proudly today, talking about the water coolers at work. They add a prime age impact bat while preserving future optionality for the team. What else can you ask for? So for Bo Bichette, he is a New York Met. Watching him closely as a Yankee fan, seeing them all those times a year, this is a guy you want on your team. He would have fit perfectly with my New York Yankees. This is intent from the New York Mets, and I really, really like this move. Again, AAV aside, I think we're in this like astronomical amount of money at this point, but this is the type of player that you can bet is going to be out there and grinding when it really matters. And that may be the face of what the Mets want to be. And it's going to completely reshape what they are. And I'm curious how he looks. I mean, think about that lineup with Lindor and Bichette and Soto all around each other in a line. That's exciting. Gives you a reason to go out to Citi Field and check out what they're doing. And like I said before, this is a quick mini reaction. Want to get on here and have a conversation. So let us know what you thought in the comments on YouTube. Also, let us know what you think on X at Tablesetters Pod. Send us a DM on Instagram as well at Tablesetters Pod. We'll certainly get Devin's reaction somewhere down the line because the other pieces out there at this point, where's Cody Bellinger going? Are we going to get Cody Bellinger reunion with the Yankees? Someone else in on Bellinger. Is Bellinger going to relent on the aforementioned 7 years he wanted and look for something similar here with a short-term high AAV deal? Or is Bellinger stuck on, I want that long-term deal? We shall see. We still got Framber out there as well. Where is he going? I had made a prediction last night in the show that I thought, just like the Phillies thought, that Bichette would be a Philadelphia Philly. I had said that Framber will be an Oriole and Bellinger would come back to the Yankees. So far, I'm 0-for-1 again. Our offseason has been very off. Devin and I did the draft about predicting free agents, and we've gotten a lot of these wrong. But I'm sure Devin's happy to have gotten this wrong because for Bo Bichette, he certainly fits the image of a guy you want to go out to the ballpark and watch on a daily basis. But again, wanted to hop on here quick and have a conversation. Hope you guys are having an amazing Friday. Please check us out on all social media. If you can, be so kind, leave a 5-star review. We are grinding this offseason, doing our best to give you guys the up-to-date content on a daily basis whenever something drops. Just do your best in that way to support us if you could. It means a whole lot. But we'll be back soon talking all these news. Again, look out to our social media. Devin's running the X account over there, so he'll be giving your reaction in real time to everything happening over there. We have the WBC coming up. We're working on getting some guests in the future, not only from the collegiate side of baseball, but internationally as well. Looking to get more people on to cover some of the teams we've had some blind spots on. But just like the hot stove, it's been uneven when it gets going. It really gets going. And we've had back-to-back nights dropping emergency pods and couldn't wait. Had to hop in here and have a conversation. But we do appreciate all your support as always. But we'll be back soon talking all things baseball. Until that time, we'll talk to you after a while. And as always, happy baseball.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. This one by Mattingly. Oh, hang on.